Have you ever found yourself lost in an old photograph, a black and white image from a world that feels both impossibly distant and strangely familiar? You see the carefully coiffed hair, the fashionable dress, the practiced smile for the camera. But then your gaze drifts to the eyes, and you stop. Because in the eyes you see a story that the polished surface can't quite conceal. You see a flicker of defiance, a shadow of old hurts, a hint of a fire that burns far too brightly. It's in those moments that a historical figure ceases to be just a name and becomes a person, achingly real and complex. Today we are going to look deeply into the eyes of such a woman whose name, for a fleeting, incandescent moment, was synonymous with Hollywood glamour and raw, untamed talent. Her name was Barbara Payton. For a brief period in the post-war boom, she was the embodiment of the American dream, the small-town girl with a face and figure that seemed blessed by the gods, who arrived in Hollywood and took it by storm. She possessed a rare, combustible energy that promised a legendary career, a place among the immortal stars in the celluloid firmament. This is the story of the complex woman at its center, the unforgiving world that both created and condemned her, and the heartbreaking consequences of a life lived without armor, without restraint, and without apology. So find a quiet place and let's pull back the heavy velvet curtain on a life that burned with the heat of a supernova and collapsed just as spectacularly. To truly grasp the trajectory of Barbara Payton's life, we must first immerse ourselves in the world she was so desperate to conquer, the Hollywood of the late 1940s and early 1950s. This was a place of profound contradiction. On the one hand, it was the gleaming dream factory, manufacturing hope and glamour for a nation weary from war and hungry for heroes and happy endings. The powerful studio system was at its zenith, with moguls like Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner ruling their lots like personal fiefdoms. They controlled their stars through ironclad 7-year contracts, which often included strict morality clauses. These clauses dictated a star's public behavior, turning their personal lives into another asset to be managed. The ideal female star was often a paragon of virtue, a wholesome all-American girl like Doris Day, or the perennially sweet June Allison. The message, heavily enforced by the puritanical Hays Code, was clear. On screen and off, goodness prevails. Yet bubbling just beneath this sanitized surface was a darker, more cynical current. The soldiers who returned from the war brought back a sense of disillusionment. The anxieties of the burgeoning Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation created a national mood of unease. This psychological shift bled onto the screen, giving rise to the shadowy, rain-slicked world of film noir. Here, the moral compass spun wildly. Heroes were flawed, and women were not always waiting by the hearth. They were the femme fatale, seductive, intelligent, and dangerous women who used their wits and their sexuality to survive, and often to destroy the hapless men who fell for them. This created a new, exciting, but perilous space for actresses. It allowed for a new archetype, the tough girl, the woman with a past, who could trade witty barbs and sometimes even punches with her male co-stars. She was alluring precisely because she was tainted. This was the paradoxical stage upon which Barbara Payton would play out her drama. Hollywood wanted women who could convincingly portray sin, but who lived lives of unimpeachable purity. They wanted stars who were sexually magnetic, but personally chaste. It was a tightrope act performed over a canyon of public scandal, and the ones who policed this performance most vigilantly were the era's powerful gossip columnists, Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper. These women weren't just reporters, they were the moral guardians of Hollywood, capable of building a career with a favorable mention or destroying it with a single damning column. For a woman as inherently volatile and fiercely independent as Barbara Payton, this environment was not just a challenge, it was a minefield. Her story does not begin on a soundstage, but in the stark, cold landscape of Cloquet, Minnesota, where she was born Barbara Lee Redfield on November 16, 1927. Her childhood was a far cry from the American ideal. Her parents, Irwin and Mabel Redfield, were working-class people caught in a cycle of poverty and instability. Irwin was an itinerant restaurant owner, moving the family constantly in search of a fresh start that never seemed to materialize. Both parents struggled with alcoholism, and their marriage was a tempest of explosive arguments and emotional neglect. Barbara and her brother Frank grew up as nomads, moving from one drab town to another, their lives packed into suitcases. This rootless existence instilled in Barbara a profound sense of insecurity and a ravenous lifelong hunger for two things she never had: stability and unconditional love. The family eventually landed in Odessa, a rough-and-tumble oil town in West Texas. It was here, against a backdrop of dust and derricks, that Barbara's extraordinary beauty began to emerge as her most powerful asset. With her cascades of platinum blonde hair, hypnotic green eyes, a full sensual mouth, and a voluptuous figure, she was a startling vision. She learned quickly that this beauty was a form of currency, a tool that could command attention and offer a potential escape from the bleakness of her home life. This reliance on her appearance, however, came at a cost. It taught her to see her own value primarily through the eyes of others, particularly men. Her desire to escape was all-consuming. At just 17, she married her high school sweetheart, William Hodge, in a desperate bid for a new life. The marriage was a fleeting, youthful mistake, and it dissolved quickly. A year later, she tried again, marrying John Payton, a decorated Air Force pilot. This union seemed more promising. It gave her a new name, a measure of respectability, and in 1947 a son, John Lee. For a moment, it seemed Barbara might settle into the life of a post-war wife and mother. But the fire within her, the ambition for something more, for the adoration she saw lavished on the stars in movie magazines, could not be contained by domesticity. She began modeling, entering local beauty contests, her striking looks making her a local sensation. In 1948, with her husband's reluctant blessing and her mother in tow, Barbara arrived in Los Angeles. She was not just another pretty face in a city full of them. There was something more, an electric charge, a raw, almost feral quality beneath the beauty. It caught the eye of William Meiklejohn, a legendary talent agent at the powerful Famous Artists Agency. He was the man credited with discovering Lana Turner, and in Barbara, he saw the same potent combination of smoldering sensuality and a deep, almost tragic vulnerability. He knew he had found something special. A contract with Universal Studios soon followed, and Barbara Payton's ascent began. Her first roles were minor, but she was impossible to ignore. She had a naturalism on screen that was captivating. Then came her breakthrough role in the 1949 film noir, Trapped. Playing a gun moll named Meg Dixon, she was tough, cynical, and sexy, the quintessential noir woman. The role fit her like a second skin, but the film that should have launched her into the stratosphere was the 1950 Warner Bros. Production, Kiss, Tomorrow Goodbye, where she was cast opposite one of the titans of the screen, James Cagney. Cagney, a famously no-nonsense professional, was initially skeptical. He saw a stunning blonde and likely expected an airheaded starlet. He was quickly proven wrong. Barbara came to the set prepared, focused, and fearless. She wasn't intimidated by his legendary status. She was determined to match him. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, a clash of two forceful personalities. The film's most talked about scene involved Cagney's character, the psychopathic gangster Ralph Cotter, brutally slapping Barbara's character, Holiday. The director Gordon Douglas planned to use a stunt double for Barbara. She refused. She insisted on taking the slap herself to capture the raw authenticity of the moment. Cagney, known for his intense realism, did not hold back. The slap was real, the sound cracking through the set. The look of genuine shock and pain on Barbara's face was seared into the film. Cagney was floored by her courage and professionalism. He became her champion, famously telling the press, "This kid has a lot of talent. She's not just another blonde. She's going to go a long way." It seemed like a prophecy. Warner Bros. Bought out her Universal contract and signed her to their own. She was on the cover of magazines, the talk of the town. She bought a beautiful home in the Hollywood Hills, drove a Cadillac, and draped herself in mink. Her marriage to John Payton had ended, and she was now a fixture in the glamorous, fast-paced world of Hollywood society. And in 1950, she became engaged to the distinguished actor Franchot Tone. This is where the story turns, where the stage is set for the tragedy. To understand the catastrophe that unfolded, one must understand the three people at its heart, a triangle of mismatched desires and dangerous passions. First, there was Franchot Tone. He was the personification of Hollywood aristocracy. Born into a wealthy New York family, a graduate of Cornell University, he was a classically trained actor who had helped found the legendary Group Theater in New York, working alongside visionaries like Lee Strasberg and Stella Adler. He was cerebral, sophisticated, and cultured. He was also nearly 20 years older than Barbara and carried the prestige of having been married to one of the industry's greatest stars, Joan Crawford. For Barbara, a girl from the wrong side of the tracks, Tone represented everything she craved: legitimacy, class, and security. He could offer her a place in the Hollywood elite. He was utterly captivated by her youth and untamed spirit, lavishing her with extravagant gifts, furs, jewels, and a dazzling engagement ring. He saw her as a beautiful, wild creature he could cultivate and protect. And then there was Tom Neal. If Tone was the polished aristocrat, Neal was the raw, primal force of nature. He was a B-movie king, famous for his tough guy roles, most notably as the doomed protagonist in Edgar G. Ulmer's cult film noir masterpiece, Detour. Neal was the opposite of Tone in almost every way. He was ruggedly handsome, a former college boxer with a notoriously short fuse and a reputation for getting into fistfights. In a fascinating contradiction, he also held a law degree from Harvard, a sign of a sharp intellect simmering beneath the brawny exterior. Neal was earthy, dangerous, and unapologetically masculine. He represented the wildness in Barbara that she recognized in herself. He didn't want to tame her. He wanted to match her fire. Barbara found herself caught in the gravitational pull of these two opposing forces. She was engaged to Franchot Tone, the man she probably felt she should be with, the man who offered her a safe harbor. But she couldn't resist the magnetic, dangerous allure of Tom Neal. Their affair was reckless and passionate, conducted in secret rendezvous that were fueled by the thrill of the illicit. The Hollywood rumor mill, however, began to churn. The gossip columns of Hopper and Parsons started dropping coy, hinting items about the tempestuous love life of the beautiful new star. The situation was a powder keg with a rapidly shortening fuse, and Barbara, whether through naivete or a self-destructive impulse, did nothing to extinguish it. The inevitable explosion occurred on the night of September 14th, 1951. It is a night that has passed into the sordid lore of Hollywood history. Barbara and Tom Neal had been out for the evening. They returned late to the house on North London Drive that she was sharing with her fiancé Franchot Tone. Tone was waiting for them. An argument erupted immediately. It was a toxic cocktail of jealousy, wounded pride, and alcohol. The verbal sparring quickly escalated into physical violence. Tom Neal, younger, stronger, and a trained boxer, unleashed a merciless and systematic beating on the older actor. It wasn't a simple scuffle. It was a brutal assault. Neal's fist crashed into Tone's face again and again, breaking his nose, fracturing his cheekbone in multiple places, and smashing his teeth. When the police and paramedics arrived, they found a scene of carnage. Franchot Tone was lying unconscious on the floor in a pool of his own blood, his handsome urbane face beaten into a grotesque swollen pulp. He was rushed to the hospital, where he lapsed into a coma for 18 hours. Doctors worked to save his life and reconstruct his face. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. The story exploded onto the front pages of newspapers across the nation and around the world. Love brawl. Actor near death. The press coverage was relentless and sensational. Graphic photographs of Tone's battered face were published everywhere, a shocking testament to the violence. And at the epicenter of this public relations earthquake was Barbara Payton. In the court of public opinion, and more importantly, in the eyes of the studio bosses, there was only one villain. She was not seen as a woman caught between two violent, possessive men. She was cast as the manipulative siren, the modern-day Helen of Troy who had incited this carnage. The unforgiving moral lens of the era focused its entire glare on her. She was a tramp, a homewrecker, a femme fatale who had brought her on-screen persona into the real world with disastrous results. In the chaotic days that followed, under immense pressure and public scrutiny, Barbara did something that stunned everyone and sealed her fate. On September 28th, just 2 weeks after the fight, with Tone's face still a mosaic of bruises and stitches, she married him in a small ceremony in his hospital room. It was a move that baffled and alienated everyone. Why? Was it an act of profound guilt, a misguided attempt to rehabilitate her shattered image by doing the right thing? Or was it simply the panicked decision of a young woman watching her life and career crumble before her eyes? In her autobiography, she explained it as a desperate attempt to make things right again, to quiet the merciless press. But it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a teacup. The marriage was a sham, a hollow performance that convinced no one. It lasted a miserable 53 days. The consequences were swift and brutal. Franchot Tone, the victim, eventually recovered. His career, though slightly tarnished, continued. He went on to work in film and television for another decade. Tom Neal, the aggressor, was charged with assault, but Tone, in a move that some saw as chivalrous and others as a way to avoid further scandal, refused to press charges to the full extent. Neal was acquitted, and while his A-list potential was gone, he continued to work in low-budget films. But for Barbara Payton, there was no recovery. There was no second chance. The morality clauses in her Warner Bros. Contract were invoked. She was effectively blacklisted. The juicy roles, the magazine covers, the adoring publicity, it all vanished. The phone, an actor's lifeline, fell silent. She had committed the ultimate sin in the studio system. She had become a public embarrassment. The misogyny of the era ensured that the blame was laid almost entirely at her feet. Men could fight over a woman and be seen as passionate. A woman at the center of such a fight was seen as poison. The years that followed were a slow, harrowing descent into a personal hell she never escaped. Her life became a grim parody of the noir films that had made her famous. Divorced from Tone and ostracized by the industry, she drifted. Inevitably, she went back to Tom Neal. Their relationship, now stripped of its illicit thrill, was a toxic brew of passion, violent arguments, and mutual self-destruction. They toured in cheap stage plays, a pathetic echo of their former Hollywood lives. But their volatile connection was unsustainable and eventually disintegrated for good. As her career prospects dwindled, she turned to alcohol and then to drugs to numb the pain of her losses. The loss of her career was devastating, but the most profound loss was that of her son. As her life spiraled further out of control, her ex-husband John Payton fought for and won sole custody of John Lee. Barbara was deemed an unfit mother. This separation was the wound that never healed. It was a source of constant gnawing grief. There are heartbreaking accounts of her showing up at his school, drunk and disheveled, begging for a glimpse of her child, only to be turned away. The dream of giving her son the stable, loving home she never had was now a bitter ruin. By the mid-1950s, the Hollywood star was gone, replaced by a tragic figure on the fringes. She was arrested for passing bad checks and for public intoxication. The mink coats were sold, the Cadillac repossessed. She was living in squalor, moving from one cheap, run-down apartment to another. The final, most public humiliation came in 1962. Barbara Payton, the woman who had shared the screen with James Cagney and Gregory Peck, was arrested on Sunset Boulevard for solicitation. She was charged with prostitution. The booking photograph from that night is a devastating historical document. The luminous beauty is completely extinguished, replaced by a hard, bloated, and weary face. Her eyes, once her most captivating feature, are hollowed out by addiction and despair. At 35, she looked 55. The news made headlines, a final cruel coda to her Hollywood story. It was in this desperate state that she was offered a small amount of money to write her life story. The resulting book, published in 1963, was given a title that was both a plea and a challenge: I Am Not Ashamed. It is a difficult book to read. It's not a polished memoir, but a raw, chaotic, and brutally honest confession. She recounts her life with a startling lack of vanity, detailing the affairs, the drinking, the fights, and the degradation. She acknowledges her own part in her downfall, her self-destructive urges, and her terrible choices. But the book is also an indictment of the town that chewed her up and spit her out. The title is her final stand. Yes, she seems to be saying, I did these things. This is who I am. But I will not carry the shame for a world that is just as corrupt, just better at hiding it. Her final years were spent in San Diego, where she moved back in with her long-suffering parents. They were years of quiet oblivion, punctuated by alcoholic binges. Her physical health collapsed under the sustained abuse. On May 8, 1967, her ravaged body finally gave up. Barbara Payton died of heart and liver failure. She was only 39 years old. She was buried in a modest grave in San Diego, a final poignant symbol of how completely she had been erased by the industry she once dreamed of conquering. Decades later, the debate over Barbara Payton's life continues. Was she the ultimate victim of a deeply misogynistic system? A woman punished with biblical severity for behavior that her male counterparts engaged in with impunity? Or was she primarily the agent of her own destruction, a deeply troubled soul whose inner demons would have led her to ruin no matter her profession? The truth, of course, is not so simple. She was undeniably a victim of her time. The double standard was real and vicious. The studio system profited from her potent sexuality and then ruthlessly cast her out when it became a public inconvenience. The press, which had built her up, took ghoulish delight in chronicling her every stumble. But to see her only as a victim is to strip her of her agency, to ignore the fierce, often self-destructive will that defined her. Her choices were her own. The trauma of her childhood undoubtedly shaped her, creating a desperate need for love that she often sought in the most dangerous places. She was a complex tapestry of strength and vulnerability, of ambition and insecurity. She was not a simple caricature, but a flawed, tragic, and intensely human being. The enduring significance of Barbara Payton's story goes far beyond the salacious details of one affair. It is a powerful and unsettling examination of the nature of modern celebrity. It reveals the terrifying speed at which public adoration can curdle into contempt. Her life is a case study in the human cost of being transformed into a public symbol, whether of glamour or of disgrace. It's a story about addiction and mental health in an era that had no language for such things, viewing them instead as moral failings. And at its core, it is a story of profound and devastating loneliness. The loneliness of a woman who was desired by countless men, but perhaps never truly seen or understood by any of them. In the end, perhaps the most fitting epitaph comes from Barbara herself, from the pages of her own raw and painful testimony. Looking back on the wreckage of her life, she wrote, "I have lived, and I have loved, and I have been loved, and I have drunk the cup of life to the dregs." She did not sip from the cup, she drained it, swallowing the sweetness and the poison, the triumph and the tragedy, all in one go. Her story is a searing, unforgettable reminder of the terrible beauty and immense pain of a human life lived without a filter, under the heat of a merciless and unforgiving sun. Barbara Payton was more than just a scandal. She was a fire that couldn't be contained, and she deserved more than to be remembered for how she was extinguished. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.